Hey, Henry. Hi there. I can't hear you. You're muted. Hi. You're still muted. I don't know why I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, there you go. Now I can hear you.
Okay, good. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Hey, Henry,
Michael,
how are you?
good.
Good.
How you doing?
Michael.
Oh, okay. Hey, Miriam. Busy day.
Yeah,
It's one
aren't
of
they
those-
all?
Some are busier than others. I was ready to go outside. It was so nice out today.
Yeah,
So, yeah, how you doing?
can't complain, as they say.
Oh, sure you can.
We're alive and kicking and just
We're
ate.
Jewish, so we can complain.
You- I just saw Mary Lou there, but she disappeared. She was trying to get in, disappeared.
How many people are on the HC these days?
I've lost count, but we've got new members. We got Mateo
Oh, really? Oh.
Pangalo. and,
Okay, cool.
Bert Fernandez. Both new members. Janice Stone. Greg Carlton. Is it Carlton?
Yeah.
And Leslie is a honorary member. Me and Miriam.
Okay. That's a good crowd.
Hmm.
Sorry, just answering a text.
Here's Bert. Oh, it's Elizabeth.
Oh,
All their phones say Elizabeth too. Bert, you're muted. There
How
you
about
go.
now?
Hey, welcome, Bert.
Thank you. I was able to get to the town hall today.
Oh, great, great. So you're official then.
I'm official.
Okay, great.
Hi, Bert.
Hi, Miriam, how are you?
I'm good.
Here's Mateo Pangalo. Keep wanting to pronounce his name Pangayo, but it is Pangalo. Understand? Welcome, Mateo.
Hey, Anya. Hello, everybody.
hey, Terry, long time no see.
Yeah, how are you?
Good, and you?
Pretty good. We are getting successional cases of COVID in our house.
Oh, no.
Oh, bummer.
Yeah, all asymptomatic, fortunately, but as soon as one person kicked it, somebody else the very next day tested positive. So
How do you know you have it? You're just testing?
yeah, we just tested as a precaution because my parents who were older were going to come visit, and my wife came up positive. So then we isolated for a week, and then the day after she tested negative for the first time, our 10-year-old tested positive.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's been a heck of a couple of weeks.
Okay.
And it screws up family events like that. Like, it's just the timing sucks.
Yeah, and that's like I feel like we were really fortunate compared to the way it's impacted so many people. We got off really lucky, but yeah, for us it's been largely a logistics thing. I was solo parenting for a week, and now I'm at home with a kid for a week, and it's just we can manage that.
Yeah.
Well, we're waiting for a couple more folks. Janice may be late today, so we may start without her, but actually we have 4. We
gonna
could
ask
start. Are you vetted then, Mateo? Did you get sworn in and everything?
Oh, that's a good question. I know I did for CPC. You know what? I stopped by to get sworn in, and Grace said she had to make a copy of the packet because she didn't have another physical
Oh.
copy to give me.
Okay.
So I may not be
Yeah,
legal.
as far as voting, yeah. Miriam, do you know, or Michael, what do you have to be sworn in to vote?
Be sworn in to
Yeah, I
vote on as a quorum. So we need to, is Greg coming? Did he ever respond?
He never, I don't
Did you give him a
recall.
call?
Yeah.
I could
And
call
Bert,
him.
I don't think we've ever met before.
Oh,
So-
hi.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. So you're connected to Elizabeth?
Yeah. Oh, Michael, hi.
Yeah.
I didn't see your name here.
It changes.
Yeah. Spouse.
Cool. Cool. Nice to meet the other half.
To meet you too.
Yeah, I'm having bookends of Fernandez's. I started the morning with Elizabeth.
Yeah, I've been following your participation in different things in town.
Yeah, well, hopefully good.
But yeah, very impressive document there.
Cool, good, I'm glad. And, we shall discuss.
What are you talking about?
This one,
Oh. The bylaw, yeah.
Yeah.
Henry, do you want to call Greg? and
Yeah,
see-
yeah, no, he did not check into either announcement. I just noticed. Oh, here we go. He's here. He's here. We spoke too soon.
Sorry about that.
Oh,
I almost scuttled it my first day.
Greg, how are you?
Yes, there I am.
There you go.
hey Greg,
Hello.
Hey, old
You know everybody?
Michael. Yeah.
Everybody know Greg? Bert, you know?
You
Yeah,
do
we
know.
met last time.
You do
Okay,
know.
Mateo, okay, you met, yeah. Great.
Near enough.
All right, so I suspect we can get started. We are at now clocking in at 7:05.
Oh, I have to take minutes. I forgot. I'm a secretary. Sorry.
Please, yes, let's
I just spaced out about that.
call the meeting to order, shall we?
weird, you must be doing minutes on everything.
I do.
Okay, yeah, as I said, Janice may show up. She has another engagement. So the main order of business today is, and the reason we have Michael here is the solar bylaw revision. So I thought perhaps I'd open it up to Michael for an intro, contextualizing what we're dealing with. I assume everyone's read it, at least the portion on the historical aspect.
Mhm.
And then maybe, and Miriam has been working closely along with this. So anytime you want to chime in, Michael, you want to take the floor?
Sure, thanks, Harry. So let's see, so I do non-historical. The reason we ended up amending it is just sort of one. I think it's helpful to understand why. So we had the current one that's in place. I think we amended twice, and then this summer and this June, the Supreme Judicial Court heard a court case about solar development in Waltham, and the question was focused on can towns reasonably regulate solar, because the statute in state law basically says that in most instances you can't. And so the SJC made a decision, came down with a decision, and the planning, although the SJC said towns could still regulate, it's pretty clear that the bounds of which you can do it are public health, welfare, and safety. So those are the only reasons that you're allowed to do it. So you can't do it for environmental reasons straight out. You can't do it for historical reasons straight out. You can't do it for anything else but. So since we liked our solar bylaw, we wanted to sort of proactively amend it so that we could sort of get in front of the SJC decision. And if you, at the beginning part, for those of you who read the beginning part, it was intentionally designed to basically say, here's our rationale for why we're putting in these requirements to regulate. And the rationale is connected to public health, welfare, and safety. So all of those requirements are sort of trying to draw a direct line. And so one of them, to Miriam's credit, it wasn't in there initially in the first draft, was about the preservation of historical and cultural resources. And so it's with the SJC decision, it's not that you can only include things, but if we got sued, they would say, your bylaw is not addressing public health, welfare, and safety. But we thought, there's a social benefit to historical preservation and cultural preservation, of course. So we wanted to put that in and sort of strengthen that with the rationales, with all the other things. That was sort of why it showed up in the beginning. We also took the opportunity to sort of lift up and clarify things that were already in there, and make them stronger or clearer, and then add some items that in the last couple of years have sort of bubbled up, for in particular, stormwater, like we didn't call it stormwater in particular. But in terms of the historical part, the things that we worked on, and I was the principal author and then worked closely with Jeff Lacy, and then the whole planning board had to sort of approve it. So Monday is the public hearing. So, if there's anything you like or don't like from tonight, you can show up on Monday morning and officially go on record as well. But strengthening the noticing part. So the way the noticing is currently in the current version is a developer has to send out notices. And it was not specific as to who they had to send out. And the information that they didn't have to document that they actually connected with and communicated to the planning board. So they basically had to notify, but just say, this is mostly about, indigenous related sites, that if a tribe responded, they weren't required to tell the planning board what the tribe said, in terms of particular locations or particular concerns or whatever. So we wrote that in there as some of the stuff. The other thing that we did in terms of noticing, which was really specific, was, and again, Miriam had a key role in this, but we wanted a name. We're trying to figure out how do you get as inclusive and as solid in terms, I'm looking at my other screen, so I'm not ignoring you guys. I just want to get to that section, so I'm articulating it right. Well, I'll back up 1 second. The other thing, if you actually did a side-by-side comparison, we reorganized the current version into the amended version just to make it flow better. So some of the things that were built in to say the noticing part in the current version disappeared in that section because they didn't make sense, and they're farther down in a section called required documents. So in the required documents, what we're now requiring in terms of historic and cultural mitigation is they have to show the notification, and then they have to show the responses that they got to the notifications. And then we articulate that a developer has to reach out to certain parties. So just reading off of this, it's like the Mass Historical Commission, you guys, tribal historic preservation officers in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, New York, New Hampshire, listed by the DOE or the National Conference of State Legislatures. And then we list a whole bunch of tribes by name. So, and that list we got from Miriam. So it's pretty inclusive of tribes that are in a broad area around Shutesbury, but within New England, and I think also into New York. The place where there was some contentiousness, and I know Mary Lou's got opinions about this, is that Miriam had suggested that, there's tribes that were in the area historically. And so there's things that could be, on a site that are relevant to those tribes, but the tribes have since left the area, either voluntarily or not voluntarily, and they could be in the Midwest. And so Miriam suggested that the way to understand that connection is through language. So if they're Algonquin speaking tribes, that there would be connection. And I gotta say, I spent a few months tracking down leads that Miriam gave me to figure out, is there a list of some sort? And what Donna, our town legal counsel, said is, if there's a developer who comes to the planning board and says, I want to, do a development, they have to have a clear set of direction as to what they need to do. And so what Donna said is, you need to have a list or some definitive source that they can consult to say, okay, I'm instructed by the town of Shutesbury to reach out to these tribes. Tell me which tribes they are that have Algonquin speaking connections. And there was 3 national groups that Miriam sent me to. There's also, I'm going to get it right, Miriam, because I've messed it up. The Mass Commission on Indian Affairs, which is, at the state. I sent emails, I left voicemails, I called.
Can I sort of jump in here for a second, Michael, about this?
Sure.
So and Michael and I had a bunch of back and forths about this. But you know, the understanding is that there is no definitive source that is a governmental source. There is no national, federal agency or state agency.
Or even nonprofit that I could tell.
Right, but any, you know, worth its salt anthropology textbook would tell you this. So that was kind of where we had this back and forth, because my feeling was if you were hiring a cultural resource consultant who had expertise in anthropology, they would readily understand and be able to research this because it's known in the world of anthropology and archaeology. But the point being that a federal agency or a state agency does not have the authority to decide which tribes have a historical or cultural relationship to a particular region. That's kind of usurping their authority, tribal authority. So you're never going to find an agency. Even the Commission on Indian Affairs wouldn't weigh in because they're not going to step into that and possibly piss off a
Right.
tribe that they left out, because they don't
Right.
have authority either.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is I called 3 national nonprofits that are tribal, that are representing of and representing tribes. And I talked to one person who sent me to someone who never called me back. No one called me back. No one responded to emails. And so my sense was, if I actually was trying to do it over several months and I couldn't do it, it's too high of a bar. So what I ended up doing is basically saying that we were encouraging contacting the Mass Commission on Indian Affairs or the Massachusetts Commission to identify additional tribes. But I don't think we can require that particular thing. We can require the whole list of tribes that I think is probably about 15 tribes that Miriam named. So
what we did for that list
yeah,
is took all of the federally recognized tribes in Vermont. Well, there aren't any in Vermont, but so Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and some of them in New York, then all the state recognized tribes in Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and some in New York. I don't think there were any New Hampshire. Was there a New Hampshire tribes in there?
I can't tell from looking
Remember,
at the
and we
names.
don't think we included Maine because I think that it was starting to feel a little farther afield. So, you know, roughly taking sort of a 300-mile radius and capturing all of the tribes that would fall within those areas, whether they're federal or state recognized. And so it's a long list, and it's a much longer list than ordinarily would probably end up being noticed. So
Yeah, I will say, I don't, you know, somewhere in the last 6 months, I looked at every solar bylaw in the state. Without a doubt, and by leaps and bounds, Shutesbury's is the most comprehensive. And we're the only one who addresses this issue at all. So the fact that it's currently in there and we're strengthening it, I think just makes it, you know, we're taking it seriously and we're letting developers know that it's serious, and we're sort of strengthening the steps that they have to do. So that's just the noticing. That's just on the front end. We're thinking of doing this. The purpose of noticing is to say, we're doing it. Do you have any, you know, thoughts or awareness about the site? The other part that was huge kudos to Miriam is the second.
you did have New Hampshire. I'm sorry, there is New
Okay.
Hampshire.
Okay. The other addition, which is really much more substantive, is we're requiring that a developer can put in a phase 1 cultural resource survey report, which is a thing Miriam can speak to. But basically, it's what it says in the bylaw. It identifies an area of potential effects as defined by the National Historic Preservation Act. A cultural resource survey, field work, review available records, review information. So really sort of a very robust information gathering. And then that has to be submitted to the planning board as to meet the requirements of the special permit. And I guess one thing I would say, because we had this conversation in the planning board, was there were some comments about, do we have to be this specific? Do we have to be, you know, asking for this much as a requirement on the front end? Couldn't we do it as a condition? You know, so the way it works is a developer will apply and they'll submit a special permit. And then once it's in, there's a back and forth between the developer and the planning board. And at the end, there's a set of conditions that if we're approving the special permit with this condition and that condition, it can be pre-construction, to be during construction, to be post-construction. My thinking was it's more important to put it in the bylaw and articulate what we're requiring, because then it's non-negotiable. It's sort of there. Whereas if it's a condition in the negotiations, a developer can say, well, that's too much to ask of us, or can we do this, but not the whole thing? And here it's in black and white. It says, before you apply, you're going to read this and you're going to know what you have to do. So the biggest addition, I think, in terms of understanding what's on a site and what the impact of a site is, and what possible mitigation could be if there was development, is the cultural resource survey report. But Miriam, you know that much better than I. So do you want to articulate what that is, assuming not everyone knows this stuff?
I think back when the Wheelock Tract solar project was getting permitted, the planning board was new to this whole topic, and it all came up very late in the permitting process. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity to get input. As a matter of fact, the issue around historical and cultural properties on that property came up after they had already closed the public hearing. And so technically the planning board couldn't even take in new information because the hearing had closed. So, but it just raised the importance of recognizing that there's a whole industry of consultants that work with developers every day of the week to assist them. So it's not in my opinion, an unreasonable reach to ask developers to do this kind of an evaluation, to retain a consultant, just like they have to retain a consultant for engineering and stormwater development, or for wildlife habitat evaluation, or for wetlands delineation. I mean, these are all, or, grid capacity and design, whatever. These are all the different kinds of assessments that they have to do for a big project like this. And this is just one of them. And I don't think it's unreasonable because there's a whole industry available. Most large environmental consulting firms even have a whole division related to historical and cultural preservation. And there's standards, there's professional standards and industry standards for how to go about doing that.
Yeah, I think where Shutesbury is sort of pushing the envelope in a good way, but it's tricky, is, at the federal level, there's established procedures for consultation and, between the federal government and tribes and sovereign nations, but it's at the federal level. And there might be stuff at the state, but at the municipal level, you can't hold a project necessarily to the same standards as the feds. At least that's what, legal is counsel. So we're trying to mirror the expectations without saying you have to do the federal process. So we're trying to build in as much accountability and procedure that has the integrity of the federal process, because as far as I can tell, that's closer to a gold standard, but without saying we're requiring that. So that's
would the developer still need to go through whatever federal process there was in addition to the municipal one?
Only if it triggers.
Only if they have what's defined as a federal undertaking. So if there's a permit application from a federal agency involved, then that triggers it. And so, for example, for solar projects, technically they would need to have a NIPDES permit from the EPA, which is a wetlands permit from the EPA. And so that should trigger that process. But as I was told by the assistant state archaeologist for the state of Massachusetts, the EPA is in non-compliance with the federal law around this. That what they require is insufficient in the opinion of Mass Historical Commission. Because they don't give MHC a long enough window to comment as the State Historical Preservation Office. And so they have a 10-day turnaround for these NIPDES permits, which is not enough time for anybody to respond. So So yes, it's there, but it's a broken system, and this is not a substitute for that. We can't rely on that as being a process that would accomplish the same goal.
Yeah, the other two things I just want to point out, they're also in this required documentation section that I think are real improvements. One of the issues that we ran into at Wheelock, which is sort of like this catch-22. So Wheelock and all of these lands that are going to be developed are private lands. And so the landowner gets to decide who goes on the property. And so basically what ended up happening in a Wheelock is that the TIPO wanted to go look on the land and evaluate, whether there is landscapes or anything that was of value to any of the tribes, and the landowner did not let the TIPO go. So if the TIPO basically said, if I can't put my eyes on it, I can't make a real determination. So it's this sort of weird thing. So what we put in here was that the planning board strongly encourages the owner applicant to allow appropriate site access to parties who are noticed, and all the tribes are noticed. So we're saying explicitly that we encourage it, but the other part that's important is that if the notice party is not able to access the land, that it doesn't indicate that there's no historical resources or properties on the land. So it's not like, so if a TIPO can't get on the land and say there's something of importance, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist because they didn't submit a report. It just means they didn't have access. So making that really explicit.
Yeah, I actually had a question about that, Michael, and
Yeah.
I'll let Mary Lou ask her question in a minute. What are the policy implications precisely of that statement, that just because there hasn't been a record of that doesn't imply that there can't be any cultural artifacts present?
Being the person who inserted it, I'll tell you what I'm hoping for, which is that, so the developer submits the special permit, and then you go through the hearing, and there's, back and forth about facts and design and all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to make it clear that if in the instance that, an interested party isn't allowed on the land, that the planning board has the wherewithal to say, there might be historic properties and cultural significant properties on the land. We don't have the data to make that decision. And so it gives more latitude to the planning board to say, they could be there. So let's assume that they might be there, as opposed to saying, there's nothing in our submitted documents, no reports that indicate there are, and therefore there are not, they don't exist. So it just sort of opens the possibility that the planning board, when it's doing its conditioning, can, say, this seems like it's a place where there has been, we don't have any record that, an actual official report from a TIPO saying it doesn't exist. So we're going to leave an open mind. So it sort of changes the dynamic where, in my opinion, if you didn't have that phrase, one could argue there's nothing on record that says that it's there, and therefore there's nothing there. That's sort of probably the easier traditional route.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to assume that, that's just, you say no to access and you get a free pass. That doesn't seem right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mary Lou.
Yeah, so back on the Wheelock track, I researched there's a Massachusetts general law that I think the commission, a couple of you are familiar with that, right? Chapter 114, Michael, section 17. And this is where the issue lies. We were told, well, this is private land and they can do whatever they want, yada, yada, yada. But that law says no town shall allow, and it is specific to a Native American burial place, right? But I don't know, it would seem to me that would help the whole
So
situation.
Well,
Here.
Mary Lou, I'll jump in because this is exactly the point. So, because it came up in Wheelock.
I remember.
So, yeah, I know. So if the landowner, we'll talk hypothetically in the future, but if a landowner says, I'm not allowing a TIPO onto my land, and therefore the TIPO can't say there is a burial site, then the issue is there one or not? Because no one who's got cultural awareness can say it is or not, because they've been denied access. So what the language here is saying is that if you don't allow a TIPO on the property, it's just as debatable that there is a burial site there as there isn't.
Right,
Where
but Michael, didn't the town then disobey that law? Is not that law written to the town to obey it? Because that's all it talks about in that law. It says no town shall allow, and then it goes on. And it even says suspected. It doesn't even say it had to be verified. It says suspected.
yeah, I
It's a-
totally get your point. And I
Yeah.
think it's this, I don't know what the right word is. It's sort of this weird thing where a property owner can say, no, you can't come on my land. And so you can't prove it, you can't suspect it. And then you have to have enforcement powers, which the planning board doesn't have enforcement powers to force.
Right.
So I totally hear what you're saying.
Michael,
So-
there's another piece to that.
All right.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember this, but at the time when that was raised, because that was raised as an issue with the Wheelock Tract,
Mhm.
town council gave the opinion that it didn't apply to permits, that because of the context of where it sits in Mass General Law, and it's under cemeteries, in a section of the law having to do with cemeteries, and that it had to do with the legal term alienation is used. No town shall alienate or assign for any other use. And that language is legalese for saying you can't sell it. So that was how she interpreted it, was that that is legalese for saying a town that owned a property that was a suspected burial site could not sell it. I don't know. I can't say if she was right or not, but that's what she said.
I'm glad you remember that. I don't remember that at all.
Yeah,
Yeah, someone else had their hand up. Is
what that alienation meant, but because that was new to me, it's legally.
Did someone else have their hand up? No.
So I got one more thing I was gonna point out, and then I'll
Yeah.
shut up. Let's see. Oh, the last paragraph sums up in one paragraph what the Historic Commission wrote, and that your whole recommended procedures for how to handle the information. But, so if we got information that there were actually sites there, the Historic Commission gets that. And then you recommended a whole process for how you would share with the planning board and how it remains confidential. And so the last paragraph attempts to sort of summarize, your multi-page recommendation to basically say that if there are reports, either to the Massachusetts Historical Commission or the Shutesbury Historical Commission that contain sensitive information, and it's defined that they're only available to the permitting authorities, the Shutesbury Historic Commission, the Mass Historical Commission, any consulting tribes, and the project applicant. So it's basically saying that, and Miriam and I think Henry worked on this report maybe 2 years ago. It was very detailed. And so I think we would follow that procedure, but I wanted at least memorialize that concept of, confidentiality and who gets to see this stuff, because we spent many meetings, I think, talking about, well, if you actually were able to document this, we don't want the world to know. So we can't document it because that would be, against the intent. And people have thought about this before, and it's, clearly it's not publicly accessible information in the way other stuff is. So just putting it in there, making it clear. So
for the purposes of our new commissioners, just so you guys understand, there's a Massachusetts state law that says that archaeological data determined to be significant, or archaeological data that's considered to be sensitive, either by a determination by the Massachusetts Historical Commission or the local historical commission, shall remain non-public. And what that means is that archaeological data can't become part of the public record. You can't attach them to minutes. If somebody put in a public records request, they can't get access to it except for under certain conditions. So that's the way state law is written. And so that gives us a role as well as Mass Historical. So
And by the way, it's also archaeological procedure. This is standard procedure in
Yeah.
Right.
archaeological activities.
right.
And I think based on my experience, sort of being in the Wheelock meetings in the audience and then being on the planning board, some of the stuff it's important to put in the bylaw just to make it non-debatable. Because in the context of a meeting or a hearing, one can, we can stand up and say, it's in the law, this is it. But it's sort of, although you can waive the actual Mass General law in front of someone, if it's in the special permit bylaw, then it's very clear. You're sort of referencing and calling it out. So the idea was to sort of embed some of the rules. So it's apparent to both the applicant and future planning boards that this has to be taken into account, as opposed to making it a point of debate, which is what it has been in the past.
Can I ask, does state law, or if state law doesn't, should this bylaw have a role for the consulting tribes in making the determination about sensitive information? Or is it just sort of assumed that the local historical commission or the Mass Historical Commission would just defer to a tribe making that request or that determination?
Well, that's a really good point. And I can't speak for state law. I have to go back and look at, I believe it's a determination by the state agency or the local historical commission. And obviously, we would defer, I think, as a commission. I mean, I'm speaking for the rest of the commission, but based on our, the discussion we've had, the documents we've published, we've really tried to kind of put a highlighter over the importance of tribal autonomy and tribal voice and choice around their cultural heritage. So if a tribe asserted something, I think I would be inclined to respect that.
Right, and I think, Mateo, the way it's written with the noticing and then with this, what's it called? The Cultural Resource Survey Report, it's a way of actually formalizing the voices of a tribe. So if a tribe says either we suspect things or we know things, that it gets documented as opposed to discounted. And so it has to be submitted, it has to be seen in paper by the planning board, which is a whole different dynamic than it currently is. So it takes away some of that, who gets to decide what's in and what's out.
Can I ask then also, this is something I was thinking about as you're discussing this very thorough section on notifying tribes, and then also about the survey report is, and maybe I'm just betraying my ignorance about planning and how it works, but what is the subsequent enforceability if a TIPO or the survey identifies resources that are directly, that can't be mitigated except for, I mean, is this essentially saying the special permit will not be granted if there's something there that would?
There's no ignorance in that one. That's sort of the rub. I mean, so what we learned, in the process in Wheelock, and what's been subsequently confirmed, is that the only people who can make the determination of if there's a historical property there that's relevant importance to indigenous folks is someone who's a TIPO, because they have that cultural sensitivity. So it can't just be a white archaeologist marching in, which is what happened last time. Nice person that he was, he doesn't have the cultural understanding and awareness. So if something is identified either as existing or as suspected, ultimately it's the planning board who gets to decide. So it's, the planning board is the one who says we're not giving the special permit or we're approving the special permit. The key is, if you approve it, the planning board has the latitude to say we're approving it with conditions. And so the two reasons that's important, one is that the more data and input you get. So if a TIPO says we suspect something or we know something, even if it got approved, you could say, and like it happened in Wheelock, that there were wide berths for some places that, although they were debated, they gave wide berth to places that were being debated as having cultural relevance. So we could say, we suspect something to be here. You can develop this thing, but you got to move it over there. So one could do that through conditions. And if we ended up denying it because it was really significant or something like that, It just has to be legally defensible because we can get,
Well,
they'll come back
that-
and,
That's
There's
what I was
another-
asking.
There's another approach to this, which is, the mitigation plan, and mitigation. I'm trying to remember the three prongs of it, but it's either avoid, minimize, or mitigate. And so avoiding would be, don't develop near that ceremonial stone landscape or that historical property. Minimize might mean, all right, you can develop around it, but you're gonna build a structure over it to protect it so that it won't be damaged. I'm just making this stuff up. But then the other alternative is mitigation, and this is something, there's a principle that comes up in wetlands regulations as well. So sometimes a developer would propose to destroy a wetland, right? You're not allowed to destroy wetlands, but in some circumstances, a developer might propose that they need to destroy a wetland, but they come up with some alternative wetland that they're either going to protect or create. So perhaps, an applicant would come to, and tribes deal with this stuff all the time, where maybe an applicant would say, you know what, I'm going to donate $20 million to this tribal foundation. Or we're going to take 100 acres or 1,000 acres somewhere else and put it in permanent preservation status. So all of those properties can be preserved forever if you let us destroy these ones. And tribes sometimes will enter into memoranda of understanding with developers saying that they would agree to those conditions. So there's this kind of negotiation process that happens between tribes and developers.
yeah. And I think, Mateo, just to build on that, I mean, my sense is that happens mostly in the federal realm.
It
But
happens.
by unearthing some of this information and having it documented to say, something is suspected or we know that it's there, it opens up the door to negotiation. So the planning board, in some regard, we could sit back and say, tribe, developer, talk amongst yourselves. And if you come up with something that's agreeable, make a proposal that makes sense. That would be the path of easiest, of that, it's a negotiated settlement. But if it isn't easy, then I think we have other choices. But the big deal is really, in my mind, is requiring that information be documented and come in front of the planning board. Because what happened last time is there was no way to get on the land, no way to document anything. And so there was sort of there's no there, so you can't make any ruling on it. And you couldn't enforce it. So it was a big hole, I think, in the policy.
So Michael, if this thing gets passed now,
Mhm.
how is this going to affect the AMP projects? Because they've already done their notifications to tribes, or they think they have at least.
Well, I'll say I probably can't talk about anything, in terms of what's going to happen. But
Yeah.
I can say no special permit's been submitted yet. So, if and when there's a special permit, I guess we could determine it has notification happened or not. But since there's been no special permits submitted, we haven't entertained
So
anything like
if the
that.
bylaw passes, then it would be locked in.
The bylaw?
Yeah, unless they subdivide ahead of time, right? If they issue it, if they
Yeah.
try to go the subdivision route again,
Well, they
they
can't.
couldn't, right? Because
They
did-
applied for subdivision a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
so they
and we
can't
denied
apply
them.
again.
Right,
For
so
for how long before they can do it again?
I don't know, but it's, that would be interesting if a subdivision would get subdivided differently. I'm not sure, but if this passes at special town meeting, it would go to the Attorney General, which is what always happens. If the Attorney General then has to approve it and say it's constitutional, which doesn't mean that it's free from getting legally challenged, but it passes muster with the state. So that would be a scenario we'd have to see, Miriam. But in terms of the noticing, I think we'd have to circle back to that. And, a developer, I guess, can say, we already noticed people and we want that, counted. Or they can say, we didn't notice people, or we're going to do it again. It's hard to know what they would do, but we won't look at it until there's a special permit that's submitted. Right now, there's been none.
I'll tell you, Michael, there's one thing about this bylaw that's just rubbing me in a really terrible way. And I just have to say, there's one sentence, just one sentence that
What is it?
it's on page 3.
Page 3, okay.
Okay. And it's the last bullet about preservation of cultural resources.
You want me to
Yeah.
share that page? I can share it.
And, or I can share it if you give me.
Well, I have it. I've got it. I've got it here.
And it's just the grammar of that first
The
sentence.
grammar,
Please,
okay.
it's terrible. It's just driving me
Oh,
absolutely.
the grammatical thing, forget it.
Preservation of historical and cultural resources in any community is important to residents by providing context. And I just feel like,
Right.
I don't know.
So Miriam, do me a favor. On Monday,
But we have
just-
other people. Maybe somebody else would like to reframe, do some wordsmithing on that. But
There are a few other words in there. I noticed the term notice. Notice is to perceive or to whereas notification, I think, is the word. I
where
suspect.
are you? Where are you?
The word noticed is used throughout the document. Notice.
that's a term of art, to notice.
But to notice is to perceive something.
No, it's also to give notice too.
It's a legal
Uh,
term. It's a
Are you sure about-
regulatory term.
Are you sure about that? They're not synonyms, notification and notice. Anyway, you might want to check that out.
No, that one I know. I mean, it's because
Okay.
you notice people. It's sort of like when you post a meeting, you're not necessarily posting it, you're noticing you're just giving notice to the community that this meeting is happening.
So anyway, that sentence seems really awkward.
Send me your
Like something
language.
is important it's not, it is important, maybe by way of, but providing context, or just maybe is important and provides context.
Well,
Maybe
send
that's a
me
better way.
send me an email what you want, because I
Okay.
think Deacon has a couple other grammatical things that he's threatened to send to me. So
Okay.
if I'm going to make grammatical changes for readability, happy to do that. So
Okay, well,
Now,
other
there's
people weigh in.
Pubic, public, pubic.
where?
Be careful, be careful.
Is
Yeah,
that in
Is
here?
it-
I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you.
Is it in there?
Yes, twice.
Really? No, well, definitely send that to me.
I'll
Yes,
send
it
it to you.
is, it is.
Hold
It's
on.
on page 3, the next paragraph says pubic requirements. Yeah, please fix that too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, you
those are
know,
minor points.
it's
Mary-
the intent of the writer, right?
Mary
What were
Lou,
they thinking?
Mary Lou had a question here. Is it something? Yeah.
Yeah. While you're on words, Michael, I was at the planning board when you were presenting this and you were going to change the word require to request. And I wondered how that come about. And I think that by saying require, it's a little stronger. And that maybe Shutesbury can set an example, for other towns to follow.
Where is
Well-
that, Mary Lou? And
Well,
where
not
was-
that's in the
sure.
part, yeah, I actually was talking about this before, I think Mary Lou popped on.
Oh.
But it's the noticing part, it's on page 11. So it's the part where, after we name all the tribes that are noticed, it was the whole point about identifying culturally affiliated tribes through Algonquin-speaking cultural connections. And so the issue was, because we couldn't find a definitive source, it didn't seem appropriate to require that they do that, because if you require it, you have to say, well, how are you going to find it? And so,
Yeah, but
know-
is that the responsibility of the people writing the bylaw to find all the sources that they are supposed to be consulting with? Is that the responsibility? I mean, leave that on them.
well,
And if I could say, I believe we are Nipmuc over here in this part of Western Mass. I'll just put that out there.
yeah, well, Miriam made that same argument. So, I sort of went with it for several months trying to do it. What, town council said was, if you can't find either a definitive list or a definitive source to provide a list, you can't require it. And that was what town council said.
Right.
So given that, sort of, what was the word
You changed it
did-
to request, I think.
no, encourage, applicants are encouraged to. So,
Encourage.
yeah, so we encourage them to do it, so we call it out.
But not the,
Oh.
that's for the tribal list. The tribal list says that they shall.
Yeah,
The-
it's underneath that.
The encourage is just for notifying the state agency and the federal. agency.
About, well, the encourage is about, is connected to the Algonquin speaking indigenous people who have historical ties to Algonquin
Right,
speaking
for the,
tribes.
so that the applicant can notify additional tribes, right?
Yeah,
but there's-
and
So,
s-
But the identified tribes are, it says shall be sent.
yeah, those are all required. And so that's why, I mean, for me personally, I think it's really strong because that's a pretty good list. So any tribe that's close to or nearby has to be contacted. And the
So-
encouraged part are just people who may have Algonquin connections, but we don't necessarily know who they are.
okay.
It's much
Okay.
better than it was, Mary Lou, because we have this really robust list of tribes that have to be contacted, no question, no ifs, and or buts.
And it does, by the way, have the Stockbridge Munsee Band. So that is a federally recognized tribe that has a base in Wisconsin, but its original homeland was in Western Massachusetts. And they have a presence here in Western Massachusetts. They have a TIPO and who works out of an office in Great Barrington. So they would be, what?
Yeah. I was gonna say, if between now and, Monday or soon after that, if there was another tribe that we needed to add for, completeness, I don't think there's gonna be objection. I think town council was fine with having a really long list of tribes that we need to notice, which is why we got to, I don't know how many these are, but a bunch. But if there's one or two that someone felt, we should just make sure that we include, we can definitely do that.
The reason why I had been pushing for like a vaguer, and I'm fine with this, I really am. I'm fine with it. I think it's really strong. I think it's it's much better than it was. I feel good about that. But that tribes ebb and flow sometimes in terms of their interest in ceremonial stone landscapes. And sometimes that's driven by even things like who the particular leadership is, because that can change over time. And so which tribes are kind of showing leadership in that particular field in this region can change over time. And so I was wanting us not to be locked into a particular list much, for fear that perhaps there would be some evolution 50 years from now that we can't anticipate, some coalition or some change in tribal organization, or the names of tribes even, because these names could decide that they don't like the name and want to change their name. So
Did we put, I'm just looking to see if we, I know
Does say
Jeff,
successors, right? It does say the tribe.
yeah, it does say their successors, so it
right,
does.
so that was how we captured, that was kind of the workaround, was to include that, particularly for that reason that things could evolve.
Michael, can I ask a question?
Of course,
In light of the court's decision about the state solar laws,
yeah.
is it the planning board's understanding that cultural and historical preservation and protection falls under welfare?
I think it doesn't quite fit into any of those three. And we had a conversation of like, okay, the vast majority of the bylaw has to be rooted in some kind of public health, welfare, and safety. But we explicitly acknowledged, and Donna also said, it doesn't have to be everything. You can require things that are beyond that. But I think if we led with a lot of things that had no connection to public health, welfare, and safety, we just open ourselves up. So hypothetically, someone can say, we don't want to comply with this section and take us to court. And we would have to argue why it's important. So, protecting water is clearly public health. The welfare stuff, it's an argument to be made. So both sides of a legal discussion can argue that point. It's mushier, but I think if we were to draw a line, I would say, Matteo, that that's probably, it's not about safety and it's not about health, unless you're talking about sort of like emotional health of the community.
Well, I know that it didn't get into the bylaw. I get it. But I don't think this is woo-woo. I think that, here I am talking as a psychologist, but I gave Michael some possible language about mental well-being, social well-being, being intricately and intrinsically tied to physical well-being and health, and that they're really synonymous, and making this distinction between social and mental well-being and physical well-being is a misnomer. And there's lots of solid neuroscience to back that up, says Miriam.
Well,
Right. And if we get sued, Miriam's going to be our first witness.
it's not only psychology.
The neuropsychologist here
Yeah,
saying,
it's not only psychology, by the way. A colleague at UMass, an anthropologist who is Ojibwe, just published a book essentially saying just what Miriam noted. In other words, the recovery, preservation, and acknowledgement of these cultural sites have deep emotional meaning for the survivors of these people.
Yeah, psychological health is health.
Absolutely,
That's right.
absolutely.
I guess
I would like to destigmatize psychological well-being.
I wonder if, I know that you're constrained by what the law says, but I also wonder if in that section on page 3 where you talk about protecting the public health, safety, or welfare of Shutesbury residents, is there any way to acknowledge that we're also talking about the welfare, in I know you can't say the history of, but if we're talking about sacred spaces to these tribes, places that are, potential burial sites or sites of worship, then if it's constrained only to Shutesbury residents, that sort of leaves out a significant portion of people who lived here before it was Shutesbury.
That's right. And for whom this is meaningful and important.
Right.
But I don't know if
Yeah.
that's something I have on page 3.
Yeah, well, I get your point. It's really interesting. It feels, I would say one of you should say that on Monday, just so it's in the record, but it's tricky because I think local zoning is about the current state of the community and the people who live there. I haven't seen anything in state law that references, like the state can say it, because the state does more than zoning. But for a town to zone, it has to be about, what's going on in the town, what kind of qualities you want. And so we can say we want to have this because it's important to us to be, respecting our history. I'll play with it. But I think
here's the argument that it's good for us to be able to be respectful of the cultural traditions and history of people who have lived here in the past, that those things are related to our well-being as well.
Yeah. Well, I would say, if the two of you or anyone wants to in the next couple of days, play with the language that, tries to make a connection that is, consistent with all the other points. So it doesn't look like too much of an outlier. It's worth considering.
I was wondering, Michael, just on page, what is it now, 3?
Yeah.
You're talking about that last paragraph kind of summarizes everything, but the historical aspect is not in it. And I thought perhaps it could be added, just a few words, and preserve our historical heritage after a colon. I don't know if you can see can you see my?
I can, there's where pubic is. I see it.
Yeah.
So after the environment, you're saying, and preserve historical heritage?
Yeah, right in here at the very end.
Mm-hmm.
Because you summarize all these other things, then you drop it off and don't.
Yeah,
I'm guessing that was an editorial thing because I added the bullet afterwards, so I might not have updated that last paragraph. So
anyway, it's just a suggestion, just to highlight.
No, this is all helpful. It's I do. I'm
Could
trying
I
to think.
could I show the commission the language that I had originally suggested to Michael? Would that be
Sure,
okay?
sure, you. Let me give you.
Let me pull it up and then I'll
sharing,
leave the screen share.
Hold on.
Let me see, how would I find it? It was to Michael.
And I think, just FYI, I think this version, the version we're looking at, is the one that'll be at the public hearing on Monday, because that's what the select board saw. So we sent it to the select board. They said, because they have to put things on the warrant, then they send it back to us, and that goes to the public hearing. So any changes will be after the public hearing and before it gets on the warrant. So if you guys, some of you come on Monday and you see this version, don't freak out that it was non-responsive.
Okay, I'm going to show you the text. Can you see this?
Yep.
Make it
So-
bigger.
Make it bigger. I don't know how to do that.
Okay, I can read it, but it's,
Okay. I can read it. Health is a state here again. Okay, I know I'm a psychologist. Help me out here. The preservation of history in any community is well recognized as important for social well-being and welfare. According to the Constitution of the World Health Organization, health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Historical preservation improves the quality of life in the community, protects the physical appearance of a community, creates more educated communities, and strengthens social continuity and engagement. For Shutesbury, historical preservation also includes the protection of cultural resources of Indigenous people who've experienced genocide and displacement from this land. They have a right to see their heritage sites survive for future generations. The importance of historical preservation for the welfare of the community is underscored by the numerous related state and federal statutes and regulations enacted to further its game. And then I have a list of about 15 different laws.
because you are you.
What?
Because you are you.
Because I am me. So obsessive and a psychologist.
So I think the one thing I would say, if you guys want to, take a stab at writing something that is more inclusive of the points you're making, it just should fit into the vibe of the rest of the bullets, so it doesn't jump out.
Okay.
I mean, it should sort of flow, and it's really, this whole beginning part is establishing the connection between public health, welfare, and safety. So with that in mind, take what's there and tweak it, and
Yeah,
I think just
I'm not wedded to the language that I was suggesting because I realize it's probably not appropriate for this document. It's not consistent with the tone, but I
Be a
felt,
version of that.
but I feel like,
yeah, we could strengthen. I mean, I think it's
so I just really
Fine to
don't
do.
think it's woo-woo or out there to say social well-being is related to physical well-being
Yeah.
and physical welfare and safety and health.
Well, I don't disagree. I think Matteo put his finger on it, though. The tricky part is zoning's about the community and the residents. And so you have to sort of figure out a concise, compelling way to express that current residents having connection to history provides their welfare. Like there's a couple of connections you have to make in a short paragraph. Not that the concept doesn't, because you're not zoning for people who don't live here anymore and have long
Yeah, I
passed
don't
on.
think it has to be tied to people
Yeah.
who don't live here anymore. I think it'd say we all benefit from this. We all, our sense of identity and community connectedness and well-being is enhanced by a sense of continuity, historical continuity, even with cultures that, maybe we, belong to other people. We're all humans.
Okay.
We're all-
Well-
You could go back to that first sentence in the bullet point that Miriam loved. And just drop welfare in there too. The preservation of historical and cultural resources in any community is important to the welfare of its residents by providing context. More, just put more in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which one is that, Matteo?
No, I was kidding. I was just offering a way to make the sentence.
Yeah, no.
Miriam just-
Opening sentence.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
Mary Lou?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for entertaining my comments, and I have to go.
Okay.
Okay. I'm getting up for a second. I have to let the cat out of the room.
So do we as a commission want to make a statement in support of this document and this draft? I guess that's kind of the question. I mean,
Good question.
we can give you little edits individually if people see grammatical stuff that they want to individually share. I don't think we have to agree on all that.
Yeah. What do you want us to do, Michael? What is the-
I guess what would be helpful is if you, between now and Monday, if you all wanted to sort of confer, I mean, or individually you could do it, but I think what we need is some kind of orally stated and then submitted written thing that sort of establishes, here's some recommendations. So, hey, you got some typos, which that's easy. And then if there's suggested wording for this paragraph to basically make the points that you made. And then I'm trying to just recall, because what ends up happening, the planning board doesn't approve anything. We have a public hearing, we get feedback, and then once there's another,
Yeah.
a final version, we move
I
it to the
I think
warrant.
like if there's edits, that's one thing. I think, I think
wouldn't
that
go crazy.
maybe we just need to decide amongst ourselves, do we feel good enough about this that we could just have a simple sort of thumbs up saying to the select board, in large part, we support this. There may be some little minor edits that individual commissioners want to share, but that we feel like we can endorse this. Can we do that?
And I think, given that this has to go to a whole town meeting, the more support going into it, the better, because it's not like this will be without controversy. So, making tweaks to slightly improve it without sort of ripping it apart, is probably a good thing at this point. Since we've gone through it. I mean, Mira's been at, I don't know, like 3 or 4 meetings where we've talked about this. So I think we're in fine tuning mode. So if we can fine tune something that.
Well, do you think it would help in the public hearing process to have a show of support from the historical commission? Or do you think
yeah, the commission as a whole.
Always. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Support from any direct corner is good.
What
And
do you
the
guys-
edits go to you or to the planning board?
You should send them to the planning board.
Okay.
And then, I mean, I'll end up doing it, but I think the planning board should just see ahead of, for the meeting what they are.
Do we want to collect all the edits and put it in one document?
Maybe that's a good idea.
I mean, I'd be willing to put that together. People want to send me edits. I guess we want to rework that last paragraph, that one paragraph a little bit.
Yeah, the
Sounds like a
other
plan.
parts, the list of tribes and all that stuff. I mean, if that seems good, I think best leave it alone. Just because it's head and shoulders better than before.
Yeah.
And if it's a matter of just tweaking this thing, I think that would work fine. Cool. This has been a good conversation. I appreciate
Yeah.
the input.
Thank you for dropping in.
Sure. Hey, had nothing else to do. So,
Thank you, Michael.
okay. Have a good rest of the night, you guys.
Right, take care. All right, so should we take a vote on this? We have a quorum
Well, maybe we should have a discussion first.
discussion, yeah, but do we need to vote on this? I mean.
Yeah, I think we should vote if we're going to take
Okay,
official action.
yeah. So open it up to discussion as far as a statement that we would send to as a group, as a commission.
I wonder if the statement would be a good place to put some of this language about welfare, that Miriam was talking about and sharing, to have that sort of formally on the record, so the planning board can then make a decision on their end about how much of that they also want to incorporate. Because I think what Miriam shared was extremely important, like in terms of that discussion about like, how do we make an argument to an applicant or to a court about, you know, how historical preservation constitutes public welfare,
Yep.
you know, the welfare of the public. And I think, you know, this idea of mental health, psychological health is, you know, a significant part of it.
Just
As
some,
well.
even some like a play, it doesn't have to, I mean, we don't have to hit them over the head with a thesis, but just some placeholder language. So that there's room later to expand on that if they had to defend that in court.
Mhm. Yeah.
To make it explicit that this is why these provisions are in here, is because we see this as being essential for health and well-being.
And we have an obligation to Shutesbury residents to preserve those historical resources, but also we have an obligation to the people that lived here before there was a Shutesbury to continue to protect those. And then if that language doesn't make it into the bylaw, at least again, you know, it's on record. So yeah, if they end up in court, they can go back to.
Say
something-
that an obligation to former have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say they're not former inhabitants of Shutesbury, but you know, former inhabitants of the land that is now Shutesbury.
And their descendants who-
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So what we're voting on is
A statement.
a statement.
Well, if we vote in principle, I can write up a draft and circulate it, and then people can send me, the way it works with open meeting law is you can send me individual edits. You can't send edits to the group as a whole.
Hmm.
So, you know, if I send you a draft and you give me feedback, then I can incorporate your feedback and then, you know, send a final draft, but I'll have to make some decisions if I get multiple pieces of feedback about the same thing.
So you have to send it individually?
You'd have to just send it to me. I would send out the draft and then you guys would send me edits back. But don't send it to everybody else. Just send it to me. You can't do a reply all. I feel like really my preference would be just to focus on that one paragraph and tweak that paragraph and leave the rest well enough alone. Unless people feel strongly that there's some critical piece. I just think that it's going to be hard enough to get this passed. And
So we're talking about which paragraph precisely now?
well, on page 3, where there were the bullets that are outlining the rationale for how these different
The connections.
connections to
Yeah.
safety and welfare. I think that sentence, that paragraph could be a little stronger.
Yep.
And a little bit more explicit without, again, I don't want to sound to get into too much, you know, reasoning, but just some placeholder language for future reference. Because I do feel like sometimes there is a tendency to view this as kind of the poor cousin, the poor relations, you know, it's like, oh, you know, climate change is important and the wetlands are really important and trees are really important. And then there's this historical stuff.
The cosmos.
And I just feel like, you know, it becomes like, yeah, that's important, but it's less important than the other stuff. And I guess if we don't feel that way, we should be clear about that. And given what happened with the permitting for the Wheelock tract, the historical stuff was really important. That became a very hot and debated, contentious situation.
That sounds like a plan then. Any other thoughts on this then?
What would you like me to, if I draft it, what would be some suggestions of what people would like to see in it?
I kind of like to think about it maybe and send something to you. Would that work? Yeah.
You can do that.
Yeah. I mean, that's my personal
Yeah.
preference, but
Yeah.
Others may want to go another way.
Greg, what do you think?
I'm not sure about the specific language, but if we send suggestions back to you, will you then send the edited text back to us?
Yes.
And how can we sort of vote on that? if we're not in a meeting?
You can't. You can't.
Okay,
So you have to sort of vote to authorize me to prepare the final draft and submit it based on the feedback I get. So it's sort of
Okay,
giving me some
it's a workaround just to,
discretion. But what I would do is send everybody whatever final draft I get. And I suppose I can, if you have really strong objections to it, you could just give me a call or respond to it individually, and I can try to be responsive to that.
okay,
Or we could go to the
I
planning.
don't think we have to kind of keep it. I don't want to have 3 paragraphs. I think, a paragraph is sufficient. And some of the language in there I think is good. Just that sentence structure was bothering me.
Yeah, we're kind of walking a fine line in that the document itself was a challenge to generate under conditions of negotiation, right? It was a negotiated document, so, but Michael seemed to imply that, we have this opportunity if we want to add something that is very focused here. We all agree on it, that that's a good idea.
Yeah.
He was open to it, so,
I think he is,
okay.
because I think he would like our support.
Is the nature of the revisions that we're talking about for that paragraph, though, really likely to cause further controversy? Because we're not proposing anything about changing the process or adding additional requirements or anything. This is the sort of prefatory justification language. I mean, I can't imagine that who knows? People get upset about all kinds of things, but I can't imagine that it's going to, trigger a further fierce debate.
I can't imagine it would be a fierce debate. It's just that people might just ignore us because they think, oh, that's the historical commission with all the things they care about that they care so much about.
Is there a lot of fight back in terms of indigenous rights in Shutesbury? I mean, do people generally agree that that's a good thing?
That's a really good question, Bert. And my opinion, this is just mine, is that generally, if you ask people, they would say that they agree with that. But how that really plays out in terms of the specifics is there's a lot of variability. I'll give you an example. I was part of the anti-racism study group that was being sponsored by the library. And there was discussion about what can we as a community do to address racism in Shutesbury. And I raised my hand and said, back in 2016, there were Indigenous activists who came to Shutesbury and picketed town hall. And there were tribal leaders who came to town meetings and were not recognized and given an opportunity to speak. And what about trying to work with the town to set about some sort of reconciliation process with some of those tribal leaders and maybe have some dialogue and some sort of reconciliation process? And there was just silence in the room, just silence, like nobody responded. And I thought, how could this be? like, isn't it? I was shocked, because these were all the same people who are saying how great it is that we have a Black Lives Matter banner on town hall. And I was just sort of shocked by that disconnect. So I don't know. People define these things differently.
Yeah.
So this will go up for a town vote, is that right? This is going up for a town vote.
But this goes to a special town meeting, which will be sometime this fall or winter, probably in the winter. And the problem is that usually the turnout is small for the special town meetings. And, it can go sideways. Things can go sideways in a town meeting. It happened at the annual town meeting in June, where the planning board had a zoning bylaw on the warrant for battery storage to regulate how commercial solar projects could have standalone battery storage. and it got torn apart on the floor of town meeting, and they weren't able, it lost by like 30 votes. Because there were only 60 people left at that time. It was at the end of the meeting, and they just didn't have the votes because everybody had left. I mean, most people would have voted for it probably if it had been the beginning of town meeting, but it was like one of the last items on the warrant.
Yeah.
So
It's an indicator, I suppose, but
I
Yeah.
just always feel nervous about town meetings because you just don't know it. A lot of it depends on what the turnout is and how many people show up, because a lot of people might support this, but they might not go to a town meeting, especially if it's in the fall or winter. I mean, if you only get 50 people who show up for annual town meeting, for the town meeting, then, you know, who are those 50 people and what are their thoughts going to be about it? I don't know.
well, could do something about that. Get the word out. Anyway, let's look at closure tonight. Shall we vote then to have Miriam receive our input for that paragraph or anything else that we have in mind?
Yeah, what if I draft a statement of support
Okay,
and then suggested language for that paragraph?
Sounds good.
And we can put that all in, like, I can put it together in an email and send it to the commission, to the planning board, and then it should get presented. So Henry, would you like to go and present it?
sure.
Somebody
So
want to
what's-
make a motion?
Yes, well, I'll move that motion that we ask Miriam, authorize Miriam to create that document.
All right, I second. Are you taking notes, Miriam? Yes.
I
Got so engrossed in the discussion here, I wasn't sure. All right, so shall we then roll call? Greg Galton,
Aye.
Miriam Defont,
Aye.
Geddes, me, Henry Geddes. I missed Bert Fernandez
I,
and Matteo Pangano.
I am unsworn currently and therefore.
Oh, you're
cannot-
unsworn. Well, we have a quorum of 4 there, so no worry.
Okay,
Motion passes.
so our next meeting, I don't think why don't we set the date for our next meeting?
I'm unlikely to be able to meet in November and possibly December because I'll be in Australia. I suppose that doesn't stop me meeting via Zoom. Now I think about it.
Big time difference, though.
Could be a huge
Yeah.
time difference.
Because-
Might be up at 4
yeah,
in the morning or something, but yeah.
yeah. I don't know. So I'll put that. Just mention that there's a question mark over my ability
Okay.
in the next 2 meetings.
We might be able to accommodate somehow.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll look into it. Huh?
Yeah,
So when do we want to meet next? And so I can post it.
Yeah.
let's look at the calendar. All right.
So when the usual one in November would be when?
Well, we had been doing like the 4th Wednesday of the month, but we met
Mhm.
earlier because of this thing.
Uh-huh.
But then, we run into Thanksgiving. Well,
Yeah.
I guess there's November 30th. When is Thanksgiving? It's the 24th.
24.
Yeah. We could
Yeah,
do
it's that week.
the
that
30th.
week.
Want to do November 30th?
That's fine. That's fine with me.
It's fine with me.
Fine with me.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so, one last thing. Not that we're gonna do anything about this, but Leslie Bracebridge, who is sort of an honorary member, raised the question about, I gather there's been a painting donated to the town at the its center of town, to the church at the center of town. Do you know anything about it, Miriam? Carol,
It was donated to the church.
could have been Michael Pill's donation.
Well, he donated like a postcard to the historical
Postcard.
commission.
Anyway,
We gave her permission to write a thank you note to him.
yeah, it was unclear to me. It sounded like it was a painting that was donated to the church.
Okay.
No, nobody. Greg? No
Well,
idea.
what would we have to do about that?
Well, she said in her email that it might be a topic to address, but I have no idea what.
Can you
Like-
forward the email to all of us? So I don't think I have that email.
Sure,
It could go on the agenda for the next meeting.
we could do that. I mean, I don't think it's urgent, right?
But it sounds like something she knew about that didn't come through the historical commission inbox. So could you just forward it to us?
Yeah, I will do. Yeah, she sent it to me only. All right.
So we
Yeah,
move to close the meeting, or what do you
let's
do?
move to adjourn.
Yes,
Who
sir.
wants to pass the motion? I move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay. Go around then. Colton,
Yes.
Defont,
Aye.
Fernandez,
Aye.
Geddes, aye.
All right. Right.
Well, it's been good.
Okay.
Be good. Be good and
Take
be
care.
safe. Be safe.
Bye-bye.
Whatever you do. Bye-bye.